lot of Texas news happened over the weekend, and to break maybe not everything down, but a lot of it down, our good friend Scott Braddock, editor Quorum, reports. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Doing well. We'll give it our best shot here, Chad.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot that happened over the weekend, and really it started early last week after you and I were on the air together, with the release of the secret audio tape. We knew that it would make for maybe a little bit of uncomfortableness for the Republicans at their retreat during the weekend. How'd everything go, Scott?
It was certainly uncomfortable under the surface. Interesting that you had the speaker give a brief speech. And remember, this is the bipartisan speaker. You remember all of the talk of he's going to be a uniter and put Republicans and Democrats together, and all of that, just unity in the Texas House as the message. It was interesting to see Bonnen get a standing ovation from members and lobbyists gathered at the Barton Creek Resort, where Karl Rove was the headliner, Bonnen speaking right before him. There was some anger under the surface, Chad. Some members basically almost shouting at each other privately over what had gone down with this tape. And, there are a lot of members of the House who probably still refused, even until last week, to believe what we had been told was going to be on that tape. You and I think, were both sort of wisely taking the position, we'll believe it when we hear it, right? I mean, we had so many people who had come forward who said that they had heard the tape and that, they all sort of had the same story. But you still don't take anything for granted, particularly when the group that's making the accusation, Empower Texans, has a history of being, I'll say it sort of politely, a history of being misleading with certain things. And so when it came to light that they had been exactly correct, and I said this on another radio show over the weekend, Chad, I was cheating on you. Another radio show, I told the host, look, it's sort of an example of a broken clock being right exactly one time a day with Empower Texans. They had gone after the former speaker, Joe Strauss, and saying he was corrupt for years and years, never turned anything up. Then, of course, they get this tape. So there were people at this meeting of the Republican Caucus Thursday and Friday who were for the first time really internalizing the fact that the speaker and Dustin Burrows really had said all those things that they were accused of saying by Empower Texans. And so that made things kind of uncomfortable. The caucus met in closed session on Friday for about 4 hours. They were scheduled to basically get out of there, around maybe 2 o'clock, and they were there till more like 5 o'clock. Really, for the first time, getting together. It's the first time they've all been physically in one place since this whole scandal broke months ago. And a lot of them wanted to get it off their chest, what they thought about all this. The story goes now that Bonnen offered to, basically he didn't offer to resign, but he sort of challenged them to ask him to resign, is the way the story goes. He offered a motion in the caucus for the caucus to call on him to resign. Politically, one person said it's sort of the political equivalent of cocking the gun and handing it to the other guy.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to get rid of me, you go right ahead. Sort of ballsy, the way one observer described it. They declined to do that, and instead they put out this statement that said, look, Bonnen and Burrows were wrong for the things that they said in that meeting. They stopped short of calling for resignation and they stressed, it's interesting, they stressed that they do have a process for endorsing a different Republican candidate for Speaker if it comes to that, sort of giving him an out here. And basically Bonnen lives to fight another day. This probably secures his future at least through the new year. But look, around the state, you see more grassroots activists getting more fired up and amped up about it after that statement came out, right? Now you have a majority of the state Republican Executive Committee saying that Bonnen ought to resign, and kind of significant that the guy who wrote the Facebook post saying he should now resign, the SREC member who said that, Mark Ramsey, a guy from Houston, is one of the guys who put together the deal at the SREC meeting in September to prevent the SREC from condemning Bonnen. So a lot of developments in this over the weekend.
Yeah, and again, now we're at the point, Scott, and I don't know how you feel about this. The conversations that I had late last week when I was in Dallas and talking with folks right before this meeting, is the consensus was, and this is how I felt, if Bonnen could survive the weekend, he's going to survive it until, at least until there's a speaker vote coming up in a year and a half.
Sure.
And Scott, a year and a half in the political world that we live in, that's a long time. And
it is.
And fences can be mended, and winning can make a lot of people feel better.
It is forever away. I was thinking about the irony of what has gone on here. You have the speaker who, in trying to make this deal with Michael Quinn Sullivan, was trying to keep, there from being, a big primary, big nasty primary, so that Republicans could focus their efforts and resources on defeating Democrats next year. That was the goal as he laid it out in that meeting, as you heard on the audio. But there is an interesting twist here, which is that Bonnen, by doing it this way and by causing this controversy, there is the potential that he's putting Republican members in the same box that they were in when Joe Strauss was Speaker. You remember, especially toward the end of Speaker Strauss's tenure in office, the end of his decade in office, some Republican members felt like they were running the same exact race over and over again, because one of the main issues in their race in the primary was always whether they would vote for the speaker or not, right? And so now you have Republican activists, as I mentioned, SREC members and others very fired up about getting rid of Bonnen. These are people with long memories, by the way. A lot of these folks who don't do anything else other than go to Republican meetings, post about it on Facebook all day, and the ones who try to recruit candidates against Republican members, they're all going to be asked the same question. Do you support the speaker? And so they have to have an answer for that, and you've seen that there are some Republicans who publicly have come out and said that the speaker ought to quit. Some House members have said that, and then what I'm hearing privately is that other members are thanking them for having gone out on that limb and saying that he ought to quit, but the question is whether they would also do the same thing.
Well, let me ask you, Scott, in this this statement that was released by the Republican caucus, they were the angrily worded statement that they put out there. Were they mad at the language used by the speaker and by Dustin Burrows? Were they mad about the whole cities and counties deal and the speaker being mean to a few folks, or were they mad about the offer of media credentials? I
think they're mad about all of it, but
they never singled out media credentials. They just use language.
That's right. I think they're mad about that. I think they're kind of mad about everything. What's interesting is, and it's a great point, what's interesting is the fact that the speaker used pretty strong language in that meeting, including the anti-cities and counties rhetoric, including the anti-LGBT joke about one guy from Houston, one of the Democratic members that they, actually the chief of staff for the speaker had accused of, or sort of joked that he was a closeted homosexual, saying that a woman was vile and all of that sort of stuff. That sort of gives cover, ironically, gives cover for them to just say they're mad about the language that was used, without kind of weighing in on whether or not anything illegal may have happened here, the allegedly illegal quid pro quo, media credentials in exchange for the way that political action dollars would be spent, in the primary next year. And I think there's good reason for the speaker's folks to be, worried about that. They have the Texas Rangers investigation that is ongoing. As the caucus meeting was unfolding, the General Investigating Committee of the Texas House announced that they've retained bipartisan legal counsel, so that when the Rangers report comes back, and we don't know exactly when that's going to be, but when the Rangers do come back with their findings, the lawmakers can have some bipartisan legal expertise at the ready to try to understand exactly what is in that report. And the Brazoria County District Attorney's Office, where Bonnen's from, they're also looking into this. They've asked the Rangers to report to them as well. And as one longtime observer of Brazoria County politics pointed out to me, it may not go unnoticed. When prosecutors are looking at whether to ask for an indictment or no-bill somebody, it's almost like calling balls and strikes in a baseball game. And if it moves one way, it might be one thing. If it moves a little bit the other way, it might be something else. And it was pointed out to me that they might be kind of pro-local government in the home of the Brazoria County DA. Her husband is the long-serving city manager down in Lake Jackson.
And the reason I ask you, Scott, about the statement and what lawmakers are upset about, to me, it's not clear. And this is, and the Empower Texans folks on Twitter, they're mad because they don't care about the language that was used. They probably agreed with the language that was used. They're mad about the media credential, or they're upset about the media credential and the ethical deal, which, let's be honest here, that to me is the big issue, right? Is the ethical, because and I put this on Twitter, that was stupid. It was dumb. There was no reason for it to be offered.
And potentially illegal.
And potentially. That's a big issue. But it seems like it's the language and the popping of these folks that lawmakers are really ticked off about. It's not the media credential that was offered, because it's like, okay, if you're mad about that, you should have singled that out in the statement that was released. And that's what, to me, makes so much of this just disingenuous, because just about all of these people support Donald Trump. And Donald Trump isn't like the cleanest guy in the world. Right? Okay.
Great point, Chad. Yeah.
And so, clutching your pearls over language being used by politicians is just plain to the lowest common denominator, is it not?
In this day and age, as a friend of mine likes to say, in these times, in this economy. I mean, yes, you have the president out there saying just the ugliest things you can say about people all the time, but these folks are worried about this language.
Come on, give me a break.
To extend on your point, I don't think that that's going to placate those grassroots activists out there who were already angry about this, and their numbers growing by the day. And again, not just Empower Texans people, who I would describe more as AstroTurf, because most of the people you're talking about who are tweeting are paid staffers at Empower Texans, but SREC members, grassroots activists in East Texas and West Texas, very unhappy about this, and what they did on Friday doesn't seem to be putting out that fire at all.
No, but again, winning cures on, and in a year and a half, who knows what we're going to be angry about then. Let's see. Let's move on, because we still have a little bit of time left, and I want to get to a couple more things. Actually, Scott, can you hold on for one more segment?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do one more segment with you. I want to talk about Trump's appearance in Dallas, and if there's conflicting messages coming from Republicans on how the state's moving and where we're moving towards. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. We'll be right back with Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. All right, Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report, joins us once again for this segment, and Scott, I received a text message during the break, and I want to get your thoughts on this feeling that is out there. The texter says grassroots supporters don't care about this with Bonnen. Now, I think this person isn't understand, like the grassroots means like a grassroots movement, like a political movement. I think what this texter is referring to is the average person out there doesn't care about this issue, and I would agree with that the average Texan, they don't care. They don't care. Now, I think that this is an issue because you do have potential, you have the question of ethics involved. You do have the question of whether Speaker Bonnen is going to remain a speaker. This is a news story, but it isn't the biggest news story. And the average person out there, Scott, they don't care, right?
I think that's right. I would also say that all of the accusations about Speaker Strauss being so, quote unquote, insufficiently conservative and insufficiently, and also accusations that the former speaker was corrupt. I don't think that average folks cared about that either.
No.
But I do think that the difference is that we're not talking about the average people. We're talking about hardcore Republican voters who do listen to a lot of these activists and do listen to a lot of the arguments that are made. I think that where this has the potential, and we've talked about this before, where this has the potential to maybe matter to people is if it's part of a larger narrative. I mean, if you do have, and they're looking at it, Texas Rangers, Brazoria County DA, if you do have an indictment come down of a sitting speaker, it plays right into a narrative that Democrats want to tell in a general election, which is that they want to be able to argue that Republican leadership is corrupt. That's what they're trying to do with the impeachment movement against President Trump. That's the way that they will frame it up if the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, if he's he's convicted on the charges that he's facing in court in Houston, if that happens over the course of the next year. And then you have a Speaker of the House, a Republican, who's indicted on what amounts to corruption charges. Then that means that Democrats can more easily make that case. All by itself in a vacuum, I think they're right that it doesn't, it doesn't matter to the average person. But as part of a larger story, it could be impactful.
Scott, I was at the Trump rally covering that, and the president very confident, as he always is. The president very confident about winning Texas, but there's been conflicting messages. You've got the president and some of the politicians who will go out and say, yes, Texas is going to stay red as long as you turn out to vote. And they always preface it that way, right? As long as you turn out to vote, Texas is going to remain red. But there is still some concern among at least those who are working these campaigns that it may be a tougher battle.
Tougher battle for sure. I think President Trump and Karl Rove were making sort of similar pitches in different ways. Trump was speaking in Dallas, Rove was speaking in Austin at the Republican Caucus retreat, and what Trump is saying is, we're rock solid as far as the presidential race. So two things can be true at once. Rove was saying that if current trends continue, then Democrats are likely to win the majority in the Texas House, and they really only need to pick up, I would argue, 8 seats at this point. Technically it's 9, but I think one of the retirements we saw in the Houston area puts it at 8 net seats, net pickups for Democrats for a Speaker of the House to be a Democrat in 2021 in Austin. And if you look at the numbers, it's borne out in those suburban districts. We've talked about it a lot in places like Collin County, Denton County, Fort Bend County, Williamson County. Some of those places already lost for some Republicans, now very competitive. And the contrast is you have Trump, who I think just objectively is part of the sort of new Republican Party, the newer face of the Republican Party. I mean, as we pointed out here before, he's new to being a Republican, right? He's previously supported Democrats. People who support him don't seem to care about that. But the old Texas Republican Party, represented by a guy like Karl Rove, he actually has some muscle memory for, running races where Democrats are competitive, and Republicans might be wise to listen to him. There are different issues they might want to stress in some of these races where things look more competitive, especially in those suburban districts. And you saw that as the message coming out of this last legislative session. They didn't want to focus as much on the social issues. They wanted to talk more about school finance, property taxes, things like that. And while some Republicans argue they had the best legislative session they've ever had, I think that's being a little over the top about it. But while they want to argue that, this thing with the Speaker's race and the Speaker's problems, it goes right back to the fact that it's hard to focus on having had a great legislative session where you focused on real meat and potatoes issues for Texans when the presiding officer of the House is under criminal investigation.
All right. Scott, we're running out of time. A short segment here. Let's talk about these constitutional amendments next week. Tell folks that they can find at quorumreport.com.
Breaking it down for you, everything happening with your state government, real news, not fake news. You can sign up for our free email alerts there at quorumreport.com to figure out exactly what's happening in real time. We'll keep you up to date at quorumreport.com.
Very good, Scott. As always, appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week, my friend.
Thanks soon.
All right, that's Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report.